Turn in your Bible to Exodus chapter 4, Old Testament book of Exodus chapter 4. And today, there's not going to be a lot of notes, but a few that are going to be just paramount to your understanding what God's trying to show us in this brand new series. Today is the first part of this brand new series. So you picked a great day to be at church because you can be here for the whole time. And here's the title of the series is The Me I Want to Be. The me I want to be. Now, if you're anything like me, there is a person in your mind. And it's not the person you currently are. It's the person you want to become. So there's the me I want to be. And here's the thing about that person, that ideal person in your mind. Is there a healthier version of you, a more spiritual version of you? They're probably a more peaceful version of you, and they're more satisfied with where they are in life than you are. And you have this person in your mind, and the problem is not that you can't see it. You can clearly see the person that you want to be. The problem is that there is a gap between who you are now and who you want to become. There's a gap between the real you and the ideal you. And this gap is something that you've tried to figure out how to cross. It's something you've tried to figure out how to compensate for. You've even tried how to go around it. But nonetheless, you stand here in life and you are not the me you want to be because of this gap. Now, we could label this gap a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, the gap that keeps me from being who I want to be is my weaknesses. And this series is about your weaknesses. Now, if you're anything like me, you have dedicated an enormous amount of time in life to your weaknesses. I mean, you've worked on them, you've worried about them, you've tried to hide them, you've tried to compensate for them, you've pleaded with God to take them. They're those attitudes that just give you aggravation. They're the inabilities that keep you from becoming who you want to be. They're just the personality quirks that you thought you would have grown out of by now. They're just the weaknesses. And the reality is they probably showed up a lot earlier in life, and here they are with you like a good sidekick. You just can't lose. Your weaknesses remain. And because you've seen them, you've worked really hard to get rid of them. But the reality is they're still here. And that can be very frustrating, very deflating. And it's probably caused you to spend a decent amount of time in your life struggling and striving to compensate for these things. But you've struggled and strived long enough that you've probably gotten to the place where you just don't enjoy life because of your weaknesses. Even in the midst of anything good happening, you still see what you're not. And I found that a lot of people simply are not filled with the joy that life offers because they're worn from their weaknesses. And so this series is for people who are disappointed in themselves. It's for people who are tired of not measuring up to not someone else's standard, but to their own. It's for people who are struggling with the fact they have not been able to get their hands around their own weaknesses. And over the last little bit, God's just opened my eyes to how He perceives our weaknesses, but also how He offers to provide for them. That in effect, He's offering to cover that gap and to help you become the me you want to be. But it's only on His terms and in His way. So today I want to start kind of what I believe to be an essential message because it's going to help you look at your weakness a little different. And it's called the Divine Defect. The Divine Defect. Have you ever bought anything defective? When I was in high school, I loved football. Loved it. I mean, I studied it, watched it, played it. And I remember that my favorite team was the Green Bay Packers. And I remember that I loved wearing Green Bay Packers gear. And so as Christmas approached that year, my mom worked really hard to find me the perfect gift. And the gift she found me a really nice Green Bay Packers sweatshirt. So she's so proud of this gift. She takes it home from the store. She wraps it up. And on Christmas Day, she gives it to me. And you can just see her face is beaming with this gift. She's so proud of it. Now, I open it up and I hold it up, and when I do, my face kind of goes into a confused mode, and my mom immediately says, "Don't you like it?" She says, "I thought you loved the Green Bay Packers." I said, Mom, I do love the Green Bay Packers. But if I wear this sweatshirt, I will be a fan of the Green Bay Packers. Because Packers is spelled Packers. And Packers, on the other hand, is spelled Pakers. And this is a Green Bay Packers shirt. My mom was so proud of this gift, but she had missed the obvious defect. And no matter who you are, you look at your weaknesses like a defect. You know, for some of you, you struggle with procrastination. For some of you, you're not good with money. For some, you got a quick temper. Others, you never follow through. And some, you're too trusting. And there's a long list of the defects or the weaknesses that we carry, but you got them, and I've got them. And listen, if you ask me what mine were, I wouldn't have to think a nanosecond, because they're so in the forefront of our minds. And after a while, you consider your weaknesses long enough, you kind of start to have this feeling where you go, man, God kind of messed up. I mean, he created me, but he kind of, I don't know what happened, if his attention got distracted when I came across the factory floor, or if like there weren't enough parts for me at some point, but something happened here, God, that I didn't get something I should have got, or you gave me something I wasn't supposed to have. And you kind of, you love God, but at a little bit it feels a little unfair, because he's the one that made the mistake, but yet you're the one that has to live with this weakness. And then that's the way we kind of view it. But what if I told you this? What if your weakness was not a mistake, but something God actually put in as part of his master plan? You see, it turns out God did create you, and that he knows every detail of your life, which means there was not an oversight when you got your weakness, that instead it was intentional, and that you got a divine defect, And to understand this life-changing truth, you need to look at the life of the Old Testament leader, Moses. Now, Moses comes on the scene as God's chosen leader to lead the Israelites out of Egypt and to become the nation that God had destined them to become. See, the reality is that God always wanted a nation for himself. He wanted a nation that was built around him, not one built around a king, one built around him, so that he could show the whole world what it looked like to have a God who led all people, not just a king. And the problem is, though, that the Israelites went to Egypt as guests, but over 400 years, they actually became slaves to Egyptians. And they never became the nation that God intended. They actually spent 400 years in this slavery. And even though they numbered 3 million people, they were stuck. And so a part of God's plan was to send them a leader, a deliverer, who would help them leave Egypt and become the nation he always wanted. And this leader was Moses. Now, if you read Moses' kind of biography, what you're going to discover very quickly is God knew how to pick him. I mean, Moses is tailor-made leader for this job. He, for instance, number one is he was born into the right family. You know, he was a Levite, and Levites specialized in helping people understand the law of God and on how to worship God. So, I mean, if you're going to have a nation that's built around God, it helps having a leader who's trained to help distribute the word of God and the worship of God. Not only that, though, in a unique twist, God actually had Moses raised in an Egyptian royalty. You may remember the story. Moses was found, and it appeared as though he was abandoned, and he was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. So if you're going to make a leader, it helps if they're raised around other leaders and understand what it is to be in the home of someone who leads a nation. But it didn't stop there. God also put Moses through the perfect training. Moses served in the army of Egypt, the world's only superpower. So not only does he know royalty, he knows military. I mean, God's putting this together perfectly, and then he gives Moses the right character, because at age 40, he allows Moses to escape Egypt. Moses goes to the backside of a wilderness where he stays for 40 years so that God can take out the pride and give him the heart of a shepherd so that he can lead people. I mean, Moses has got the pedigree, he's got the upbringing, he's got the training, he's got the right character. He's perfect for the job. God knows how to create the perfect leader. And it seems that way until God comes to Moses. He comes to Moses and says, Moses, I've heard the cries of my people, and I've been preparing you to lead them. Now it's time for you to go and do your job. And Moses, in effect, says, God, wow, I'm honored. And I know you put me in the right family, and I was raised in Egypt, and I know I served in the military, and we've been out here on this backside, and I know how to care for people with the right heart. God, I'm honored. But you made one big mistake. You forgot one thing, God. I've got a defect. And in chapter 4, verse 10, Moses expounds on that defect, and he says, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Now listen, this is not a minor defect. Name me a politician, an activist, or a national leader who's a bad speaker. I mean, God, it's kind of like packing for the whole trip and forgetting the most important thing. I mean, if you're going to make a leader, they have to be able to speak. I mean, how are you supposed to announce God's plan when you can't enunciate? How are you supposed to be God's spokesperson when you can't speak? I mean, this is not like a minor thing of, oh, Moses will work around it. This is kind of the whole thing, God. And I know how Moses felt as he's standing there going, God, I'd love to be what you want me to be, but I've got this defect. And you probably felt that way. God, I'd love to be a better parent, but you didn't give me the temperament for it. God, I'd love to be a better student, but you gave me ADD. God, I'd love to be more open and honest and out there with my faith. Then why'd you make me an introvert? God, I'd love to be what you want me to be, but I've got this defect. And I don't know if Moses just thought maybe God would be like, oh my gosh, Moses, thank you for bringing this up. Like I almost put the whole plan on you. Oh God, I got to get it together. I'm telling you, I just had coffee this morning, and instead, God in God fashion, he looks at Moses and reminds Moses of his godness. And he says in verse 11, the next verse, he said, the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? By the way, we see those as weaknesses. He says, who gives them sight or makes them blind? It's weaknesses. Is it not I, the Lord? He looks at Moses and says, Moses, you think you have a defect, but you need to get in your mind, it's by design, my design. And then you start going, well, why? Like, why would God? I mean, that's almost cruel. Like sometimes doesn't it feel like in your weaknesses, God's cruel? Like almost like at one point, like we're just entertaining him with our weaknesses. Like he was in heaven and go, you guys want to see something funny? Watch these two people. They're opposites in their weaknesses. Let's put them in a marriage. Watch this. I mean, that's what it feels like sometimes. Like, God, what were you thinking in this? Why would I have this weakness? And God says in the next verse, he says, now listen, Moses, this discussion's over. Go, and I will be your mouth, and I'll teach you what you shall speak. What if God's offering not to make you a better parent, but to be your parenting skills? What if God's not offering to make your business better, but he's offering to be your business partner? What if God's not offering to give you a better personality, but he's offering to be the personality when you need it for what's ahead of you? He says, I'll be your mouth, Moses. And it reveals that your weakness is not something God works around. It is the very space he designed himself to work in. That he is not repelled by your weakness, he's actually attracted to it. Because it is the place that he has set up for himself to display his glory and execute his plan for your life. And so what I want to help you with in this and your weakness is I'm going to spend a few weeks on this. But I want to give you the foundation today of why God would you give me a divine defect? Because there's two things that God accomplishes with your divine defect that are very important to him. And if you learn to walk with them, to cooperate, to partner with them, they'll be life-changing for you. Here's the first one. Your divine defect draws you closer to God. Draws you closer to God. Listen, more than anything else, your destiny could be to be a great leader. Your destiny could be to lead a Fortune 500 company. It could be to make a lot of money. It could be to help a lot of people. I mean, you could, I don't know what your destiny is, but I do know this. For every single person here, your destiny is, by God's standard, to grow closer to him in a relationship. It's the first thing he planned for you when he put you together was to be in a relationship with him. And here's what he's figured out. That our weaknesses draw us to him. There's a thing called the magic wand theory. I heard a pastor talk about it years ago. And obviously there are no such things as magic wands. But if there were, God would never give us one. Because if I were to give you a magic wand, the first thing you'd bippity-boppity-boo to yourself is you take out your weaknesses. I mean, it wouldn't be in your hand any longer than a few seconds before you'd have done changed your mouth, you'd have done changed your body, you'd have done changed your personality. You'd have instantly become the me you want to be. You'd cross the chasm, you'd go through the gap, you would instantly change yourself. And you'd never go to God again. Because you'd find yourself self-sufficient. And God will never give us a magic wand so that we can erase our need for him. That's the reason that as you go through life, there'll be seasons where you were once good at something, and all of a sudden God reaches in and turns off that function in your life. Listen, some of you used to be awesome at your job. Used to kill it. You were top of the sales list, always had the best ideas, and in the last little bit, it's like God reached in and turned it off, and you don't know what's going on. Like you're not any good anymore. Some of you used to never to struggle to get a date. Now it's like you don't even wear deodorant. I mean, you signed up on everything. eHarmony, Christian Mingle, Farmers Only. You ain't even know what a tractor is, and you signed up. And it don't matter because God's turned it off. Listen, some of you used to have all kinds of friends. You had to turn people down on a Friday night. And now you can't even find a Facebook friend. It's like God turned it off. And you're standing here going, God, why did you do that? I need that. And he says, no, you need me. Moses, I'm not going to give you a mouth. I'll give you something better. Me. Because your weakness draws you closer to me. Now listen, that's the first one. Here's the second one. The second one's going to take the whole series to unpack. Here it is. Here's the second one. Your divine defect displays God's grace. This whole series is really about grace. It's about grace. And here's my struggle as a communicator. You already think you know what grace is. It's so commonly spoken, but yet it's so under-realized in our experience. Like, well, we think we know what it is. We think we sang about it. I got it on a picture in my house. Like, I know what grace is. Let's move to the next thing. What don't I know? Listen, if you knew what grace was, your life wouldn't struggle with weaknesses. And so that's my job is for these next few weeks to help you see how grace fills the gap. That it is the very place that God has decided to display his grace is your weakness. Now, most of us, because we have a limited understanding of grace, we only understand grace in one sense, and that's saving grace. That's the grace we sing about. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. That's all we know about grace. That it's the kind that got me to heaven. And saving grace is vital. It's the introduction to grace. You got to know saving grace. For example, it's explained, if you don't know, in Ephesians 4:4, but God's mercy is great, and he loved us very much. Though we were spiritually dead because of the things we did against God. Pause. Before you followed Jesus Christ, you were spiritually dead. Let me say it this way. If you're not following Jesus Christ, you're spiritually dead. And the reason you're dead is because of what you did against God. So I didn't do anything against God. I never even met him. Oh, yes. You were born into sin, and you have committed sin. And sin is punishable by death. So that seems a little stark. Well, here's the reality. God created it. He rules it. If he created the world and he rules the world, then the world rules by his rules. And God's rule are, he has a standard. And sin misses that standard. Now you can say, well, we get into degrees of sin. We can talk about, well, that's more of a sin than less of a sin. Let me be clear about what sin is. Sin is when you chose your way instead of God's way. When you chose your way in a relationship, chose your way in a substance, chose your way in whatever else, attitude. It's just when you chose your way instead of God's. And by God's standard, in a world that he rules, by his rules, sin is punishable by death. Let me make it even more clear. You deserve death and eternity in hell. Aren't you glad you came to church today? So encouraging. Listen. It's fair. It's God's world, his rules. You broke them. It's fair. There's not a court of law that would say that you get death for sin. These are God's rules. Yep, it's fair. It's just for him to give you death and hell. And yet, he didn't choose to be fair. Instead, it says he gave us new life with Christ. And he saved us by God's grace. Fair is you dying and going to hell. Grace is you receiving eternal life and becoming a son or daughter of God. Listen, but not because you earned it. See, if you were to ask 100 people on the street today, what does it take to get into heaven? Most of them could be summed up in the response of, you got to be good enough or you got to do enough good. What we think is like we're on a point system of some sort. And God's got this big old calculator, and if you do enough good, you know, like at Chuck E. Cheese, the sirens go off and you go, now you get to come in. Come on, you've done enough good. Listen, grace is never going to be about your merit. It's always about God's goodness. Because our merit gave us death. His grace offers life. Now let me say, that's why Romans 3:23 says, everyone has sinned and fallen short of God's glorious standard. And all need to be made right with God through grace, which is a free gift. A free gift. So let me say it this way. That is the fundamental difference between every other religion on the planet and Christianity. Every other religion on the planet. Now, you'll hear people say, they're all just the same. It's just a different rule book. Just different. No. This is the one place that they are completely different. Religion is man's attempt to earn his way to God. Christianity is God coming to man and offering grace. Foundationally different. And it's for this reason that I must point out, it is a free gift. Meaning you can accept it or decline it, but you can never deserve it. You can accept it as a gift. You can refuse it as a gift, but you cannot deserve it. Listen, you think bad people go to hell. That's not true. We're all bad. The only people that go to hell are people that refused grace. It has nothing to do with what they've done. It has to do with what they did with grace. Because it's a free gift. So saving grace is important. And let me just say, saving grace is good enough. We don't need to go any further. Because the fact that I deserved death and hell, but received eternal life in the sonship of Lord Jesus Christ, I'm telling you, that's enough to go home on today. But God in his generosity offers more grace. But unfortunately, most of us don't know there's more. We think that grace is only to get to heaven. But God not only offers something called saving grace, he also offers something called sustaining grace. And see, saving grace is for heaven. But sustaining grace is for while we're still here on earth. You say, well, what is sustaining grace? Sustaining grace is simply defined, you may want to write this down, as it is God's power at work in us, doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. It is God's power at work in us, doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. So let me give you the simpler definition. It's God's strength in your weakness. It's God's grace bridging the gap between who you want to be and who you are. That you can't make it happen, but he can give you grace to compensate for it. Listen, and do you know why God does this? God uses your weakness to display his grace for this reason. Had Moses been given a mouth instead of grace, your Bible would read much differently. Like we wouldn't be, if you read the Bible and God gave Moses a mouth instead of grace, you know what it'd read like? And I'm telling you, that Moses, he was a talker. That guy could walk in and talk anybody out of anything. One time Moses was he was so eloquent, he walked into Pharaoh's throne room and talked Pharaoh out of 3 million slaves. I ain't never seen anybody. I mean, we should pause for a second and consider what a great talker Moses is. See, if God gave him a mouth instead of grace, we'd be talking about Moses' ability. Instead, do you know what it said? Let me just sum up your scriptures for you. I cannot believe it. That guy couldn't put 2 words together, but everywhere he went, miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle followed him. He must have had a God behind him, because I'm telling you, he was not impressive at all. And it displayed God's ability. That's why God is not going to give you a strength, but he's going to give you himself in the weakness. But do you know why most of us don't get to experience that grace? Because something is already in its spot. And it's called willpower. Most of us don't experience sustaining grace because we're sustaining ourselves with our own willpower. And we just think if we strive hard enough and work hard enough. And listen, it's in the way we think and all the way through. But it's so ironic. So ironic. Because on one hand, we know we need saving grace to get us to heaven, but we don't believe we need sustaining grace to get us through earth. It's like we went, God, I can't do it to get to heaven, but I can handle life down here on earth. It makes no sense. You need grace to get to heaven, and you need grace to make it a day on earth. And that's why God offers both of them. And I would say it this way. If you choose to only receive heaven's grace and not to take the sustaining grace for earth, you're a fool. Wow, Pastor. Well, I didn't say it. The Apostle Paul did. He's a lot meaner than I was. Galatians 2:3, he says, you began life in Christ by the Spirit. That's saving grace. He said, but now you're trying to make it complete with your own power. And that's foolish. Here's what Paul says. Only a fool would try to compensate for their weakness with willpower. Only a fool would strive and struggle when there's a sustaining grace available. Now, I remember it wasn't that long ago for me, the difference in these two. Some of you know this story, some of you don't because you're new. I became the lead pastor of this church at 29 years old. And no one had to tell me how defective I was to do this. I did not go to school to be a pastor. I had never pastored. And I had only, in an 8-year ministry behind the scenes, I had only ever spoken about 8 times. I'd only ever done this about 8 times. So listen, here's what that means. It means at that stage of our church, we had a really poor interview process. That's what that means. And we've worked real hard to make that better. No, seriously, nobody had to tell me. The minute they talked to me about it, I knew how defective I was. I knew that I didn't have what it takes. I knew I didn't have the pedigree, the upbringing. I knew that I didn't have the training. I knew that I didn't have the natural abilities. And I knew. And so, when I became the pastor, I took the weight on myself. Like I worked, for those first 2, I worked as hard as humanly possible. Because I thought it depended on me. And listen, we're talking about the spiritual care of thousands of people, and we're talking about staff members who hold their families eat based on their salary. And I just felt like the whole weight of that. And I'm just thinking, if this is a long shot, but if I work hard enough, I try hard enough, I study deep enough, I don't sleep too much, might make us be able to make this happen. And so that's what I did. 104 weeks I did that. And at the end of it, I was worn out. But listen. At the end of it, I was so sick of the gap that I got to the place where I enjoyed off weeks more than on weeks. Listen, if you pastor a church, you should want to be at the church, not be happier when you are not at the church. But that's just where I was. And I remember on a Monday afternoon going into year 3, just saying to God, God, I cannot do this. You need to find someone who was built for this. And because I had no concept of grace, this is what I expected God to say. You just need to try harder. If you'll just give more, like if you'll sleep a little less, if you'll just take more lunches, if you'll just do more, you just need to try. Come on, if you'll give it all, you and I together might be able to make this happen. And that's not at all what he said. He said, good. I never asked you to do it. I asked you to follow me, and I'll do what you cannot. Listen, and the minute I gave up, he gave grace. And if you go back and look at what's happened in our church, at year 3, things start to, it's like somebody turned something on. And people started to come, lives began to be changed, campuses, all this kind of crazy stuff. Listen, it's because I gave up. And it's because he gave grace. Listen to me. Surrender is not some crutch people use when they can't handle life. Surrender is the acknowledgement that there is a God and it's not me. That's what surrender is. So here's my question for you. At what part of your life is God waiting for you to give up so he can give grace? What part of your life is he? What part of your home, what part of what you got going on is he just saying, man, I just wish they'd give up because I got all this grace. My goal in the next couple weeks is to help you embrace grace. Matter of fact, my goal for this series is to take your weaknesses in one hand and your in God's grace in another, and just show you how they literally they've been made for each other, like a puzzle piece, perfectly put together. But you'll never discover that if you just keep thinking it's on you. If you keep thinking the business is because of you and this family has to happen and my kids are going to turn out based on the way I work and hard and strive. As long as you're struggling and striving and dependent on your power and your thinking and your ability, you're never going to be able to embrace grace. And I know this is a huge challenge. Some of you are wringing your hands even in this moment thinking about the idea of truly trusting God with something and to walk away and just go to sleep instead of worrying about it. And it's just a difficulty to consider that I'll just be okay with this weakness I have instead of actually, trying to outwork it. And so to help you embrace grace, I want to remind you of this, that you can trust God with the days ahead, because how do you think you got this far? Grace is not something new to your life. It's been carrying you your entire life. Just because you weren't aware it was carrying you does not mean that it hasn't been carrying you. This is not a new thing. It's just you're discovering what's really been making it happen anyways. For example, a few weeks ago, Ellie, all the kids, we got home late and they fell asleep in the car. And so as Ellie woke up, as we pulled into the house, she said, Daddy, will you carry me to my bed? And I know the nature of what this question really is. When you're asked that, she's not just asking, will I? She's asking, first of all, am I capable of carrying her? And yes, I am capable of carrying her. And then number 2, she's asking, are you willing? And I think that's the struggle with grace for a lot of us. We believe God has all power. We're just not sure he wants to execute it on our behalf. That we know he can handle the situation. We're just not sure he wants to. And so what I would say to you, though, is that you can be certain that God is both willing and capable, because he is a perfect father. And I'm not a perfect father, but in that moment when my little girl wanted me to carry her to her room, I leapt at the opportunity to carry her. No hesitation. So I went around, I got her out of the car, and I put her in my arms, and I carried her from the garage into the house and around the corner and up the stairs and into her room, and I laid her on her bed, and she was asleep, and I stepped back, and I just smiled at the chance to be able to carry my little girl. But it was the next morning that stuck out to me. Because the next morning when she woke up and Sydney's in the room playing and you just kind of wake up groggy, and she said, Daddy, I'm confused. She said, I fell asleep in the car. How did I get here? And Sydney is younger, but she's sassy. And she looked up from playing and she looked at her and goes, duh, Dad carried you. As to say, how else would you have gotten here? And I guess what I'm just trying to say is this. Some of you are struggling with the idea of can I let God have it? Do I need to keep depending on me? Is it like half God and half me? And maybe, if I take my eyes off of it, if I take my hands off of it, it might not work out. And I just don't know. I think I really need to keep trying. And I just don't know if I can trust God to get me from here to there. I just don't know if I can give this to him. And all I'm saying is, duh, how do you think you got this far to begin with? He got you this far, and he's going to carry you the rest of the way. It was grace that saved you. It was grace that healed you. It was grace that got you through when you were alone. It was grace that freed you from addiction. It was grace that gave you the breath you just took. It was grace that showed you how to raise your kids. It was grace that helped you make the money and teaches you how to use the money. It's grace. It's grace. It's always been grace. It always will be grace. There's never been a moment that it hadn't been grace. And whether you don't see it or not, it's grace. And I'm just saying, if it got you this far, it's going to cover the rest of the way. But let me say it this way. Your defect, you've got one. And God designed it as a space for grace. He put it there so you could know him and could see what he could do when you depend on him. And the quicker that you understand you got here by grace and you'll get there by grace, the better you'll enjoy the ride. Matter of fact, I believe it is. I think you're going to get there either way. I just think the only question is, will you enjoy it or be miserable? Because grace is going to get you there. It just depends on if you enjoy the ride. Do you know Moses, God never gave Moses a mouth. Read the whole story. There's like 40 more chapters. He never gave Moses a mouth. But he did give him a staff. Moses asked for a mouth, but God said, no, I'll give you a staff. And every time the Bible records that he raised the staff, miracles took place. Every time he raised the staff, seas parted. Every time he raised the staff, battles were won. God says, Moses, I won't give you a mouth, but I'll give you something to lean on. And I'm just saying to you, he's probably not going to take away your weakness. But he's offering grace to lean on. He's probably not going to just change you overnight. You're going to be with this thing. But he's going to give you grace to lean on it and trust that he can bring you through it.